All right, welcome back, everyone, to the the grand finale of this class, of the Distinguished Innovator Lecture Series. Today, I'm very proud and happy to be able to present to you Ann Winblad as, as our speaker. Ann has been in the software business for 25 years, and elements of those 25 years have included founding a company called Open Systems, and this is a company that she started with a huge investment of $500. And I don't know, maybe with inflation that's more today, because it has been a little while, but still, it's virtually bootstrapped. She's also the co-author of a book, Object-Oriented Software. She's a partner and co-founder of the venture firm, Hummer Winblad Venture Partners. And she's currently on 3 boards, which she will admit to being on. Apparently there are some others that are in stealth here. But the 3 that we know of are Voltage Securities, Kilian, and MuleSource. And with that, we're very fortunate to have Ann.
Great, thanks. Before I get started here, how many of you are engineering majors? Great. And business majors? And how many have been to most of the other lectures? Perfect. So I watched some of those lectures. Let's make sure this works here.
We gotta get your microphone
turned up. How's that? Better? Can you hear me? So let me go back here. Let me just tell you what I do every day before I get into my lecture tonight. I'm a venture capitalist. In 1989, we created a new fund called Hummer Winblad Venture Partners to fund software. And just to show you how new the software industry is, my partner John Hummer and I went out to raise that fund, and it took us 2 years and 133 meetings to raise our first fund, which was only $35 million. Because people were concerned that software was not an investable category, that the assets would walk out the door at night and no one would make any money. So here we are today, almost 18 years later. We funded 102 software companies. One of our first investments, a company called Hyperion Software, we funded 2 guys, Jim and Bob, and we gave them $1.2 million, and Sequoia Capital gave them the other $1.2 million. And next week they'll be acquired by Oracle for $3.3 billion. One of the interesting things about the software industry is right now Rome is burning. You probably don't have time as students to read all the headlines, but the headlines are pretty theatrical right now. Just in the last 2 weeks, Shai Agassi resigns from SAP. SAP's core technology strategy in question. Cisco, company, acquires WebEx, declares their biggest competitor is now Microsoft. EMC, traditionally a hardware company, acquires RSA. Oracle sues SAP for stealing trade secrets because the competition is so tough. And German software giant acquires WebMethods for $500 million and declares their new competitors IBM and TIBCO. So today what I'm going to talk about is, I know you've heard in your lectures about consumer internet companies. You heard from Greg Giannaforte about bootstrapping SaaS companies. You've even heard about the long tail, buzz PR. My goal tonight is to convince you that enterprise software is really, really cool, and that's where the action is, that real engineers really matter in tomorrow's and today's economy. What we do is we have to catch waves. By the time this wave is surfacing, it's really falling on top of the incumbents. So we have to catch the waves really, really, really early, long before anyone sees what technology is going on. So if we talk about today, we're really talking about one of the most disruptive times in the 30 years I've been in the software industry. What used to happen in the software industry is there would be a new platform. I entered the software industry when the PC and PC operating systems came about. Then there was distributed systems, then web services. And every time there was a new platform, a few software companies were created. Oracle was created in the distributed computing era. Microsoft, the poster child of the PC era. So we'd always wait for these platform shifts. But today, we don't have to wait for platform shifts. There are other disruptions. Multiple waves are creating a tsunami, which is why Rome is burning for the incumbents. Those include pervasive computing, business process transformation, service-oriented architecture, web services, open source, software as a service, virtualization. I can go on and on. The business trends, you've heard about those. Lip-Bu talked last week about globalization. Here in the US and worldwide, the impact of regulations and compliance are big disruptors. The workforce itself is evolving from physical to virtual. If you work for IBM Corporation in Silicon Valley, where there are tens of thousands of employees, you don't have a desk. You take home your Cisco phone every night, you plug it in wherever there's nobody sitting. You effectively work where you can. If you're at Best Buy in Minneapolis, that doesn't sound as progressive as Silicon Valley. You just go to work whenever you want. They don't have hours there for anyone because they think it's better just to work according to your own cadence. And last but not least, which you heard from Mark Andreessen, consumer technologies are affecting daily work life. Not just daily personal life, but daily work life. This has changed what is happening in the enterprise software market dramatically. This is disruptive, which is what we as venture capitalists love. It's also changed the software business models. I'm going to tell you what I mean about catching the wave using myself as an example. Who can identify the two items on the slide up here? The one on the left is a pool table, and the one on the right is a teletype. My first job was in a pool table factory sending telegrams to Italy about the marble. So I used to go to work after work wearing my cheerleading outfit and send telegrams. That was in the late 60s. But while I was sitting there sending telegrams, what was happening in the wave? In 1964, when I was in junior high school, Gordon Moore created Moore's Law, seminal to Silicon Valley. In 1971, still in high school, the first microprocessor appears, the Altair 8080. Now, for those people who were really thinking about the teletype or the pool table manufacturer, they didn't catch this wave. In 1973, I got my first job at the Federal Reserve Bank in Minneapolis. And I worked in that building that you see there, a big shiny building at the end of Nicollet Mall. I worked on an IBM mainframe. I wrote assembler macros as CICS code, which is part of mainframe programming. And over on the side, for this young group here, that's actually, I know one person who can identify it. That's I Dream of Jeannie. We had cubicles then, that was the big breakthrough. And we didn't have any TiVos, sling boxes, or anything like that. So every day my cubicle mate went home at between 3 and 4 in the afternoon. I was a new systems programmer there, so I didn't want to ask anybody what he was doing. And finally I asked, "Where are you going?" He said, "Well, I have to go home at 3 o'clock in the afternoon because my favorite television show, I Dream of Jeannie, is only on then." So as you can see, productivity was a lot lower in the early 70s. But again, what's happening in the wave? I'm there right after college, email's invented. Mini computers, first 12 and 16-bit computers. Pong, the first computer game that you could play on a screen. The first Altair hobbyist personal computers appeared. This is about the time that Bill Gates and Paul Allen were starting to read hobbyist magazines at Harvard. But even more seminal to that, it was way back in 1974 that Vint Cerf published a protocol for packet network interconnection, which really was the core for TCP/IP, the underpinning of the internet, right here at Stanford under a DARPA grant. So what I'm illustrating here is that right at this point in time, everybody in the software industry, in the technology industry, didn't think software was valuable. IBM pretty much owned the technology era. If you wanted to get software, it's called time sharing. So nobody thought there was any room at all for anyone to actually go up against IBM. We hadn't yet had the birth of the software industry we know today. So what happened? In 1970, I then quit my job at the Federal Reserve Bank. I discovered that a lot of people went home between 3 and 4 and watched I Dream of Jeannie, and they just weren't as competitive as I was. So I quit my job and started a software company called Open Systems. Our ground rules were that we would program anything that didn't require soldering, because the early personal computers, some of them you had to put together as kits. So we were fortunate. All the young software companies that picked the kit computers died because those computers were gone. Now, at this point in time, it is 1975. Just to let you know what was happening in 1975, I was in Minnesota. Unemployment in Minnesota was 11%, was about 8.5% across the whole country. Inflation was out of control. If I wanted to get gas in my car, I had to sit in a gas line at a gas station for about 2 hours. The President of the United States at that time, Nixon, resigned, and I was a big football fan, and unfortunately the Minnesota Vikings lost in the Super Bowl that year as well. But really what was happening is everybody who saw what was happening back here, who saw this wave, and who were working on computers that owned the marketplace, were the ones that jumped in here. What happened in 1975? Bill Gates drops out of Harvard and starts Microsoft with Paul Allen. Steve Jobs sells his Volkswagen bus in Portland, Oregon to have a little bit of money to start Apple. I quit my job even though I had huge amounts of student loans. My parents were, catatonic when I told them I was starting a software company. They didn't know what that was. They hoped it was something legal because it was the 70s after all. And started a software company. Everybody then thought that there was a big battle about to brew, and the battle was going to be this little company called Microsoft, who now had this operating system called MS-DOS, against IBM. But what IBM didn't know is the wave had already crashed on them. They were not on the wave, they were under it. That victory was already won right there in 1975 on the day that Bill Gates dropped out of Harvard, because he was in the wave 5 years ahead of it, before 1981, when IBM released that PC, and IBM was late to the wave. So if we go forward a little bit, I got to know Bill Gates in the 80s. We also thought that it might be easier to communicate with a cell phone, so we each went and bought one. I found a picture of those cell phones we had. They weighed about 5 pounds. They cost $600 each, and you had to drive around a lot of places to find out places they work. We actually would go to virtual movies together. He was in Seattle, I was in Minneapolis, and we'd drive around on our cell phones and say what was showing in the theaters near us. There was no Netflix, no really cell coverage, no video on demand. But even this flat period, the PC era had been spoken for. New companies like Lotus, Apple was releasing the Macintosh. There's other things happening. In 1987, UUNet is formed. And while no one is watching, there is more IP traffic than there is FTP traffic. The internet is happening. If we look ahead here, we started our firm in 1989. We had to catch a wave, otherwise we wouldn't be successful. The wave we saw was under the auspices of Oracle. They were bringing out distributed databases. So we very early on saw this wave, while we were raising our fund, that effectively you were going to be able to move to distributed computing. We also saw that, web traffic was overtaking FTP traffic. Also, you did, as early as '91 was when Tim Berners-Lee published his paper at CERN. So remember, the big boom-bust period didn't really happen until way into the late 90s, but you have to be early on this wave. 1996 is when Larry and Sergey were students and working on the precursor to Google called Backrub. We funded a bunch of companies then and successfully got this wave. We took 8 of the 16 companies we funded public. We went off the distributed computing metaphor and funded another little company here in Berkeley called Wind River Systems in embedded systems, because we also saw that software was having more power than just managing operating systems and applications. And we were very, very right about that. We funded Wind River when there were 8 people. They were down the street here in Berkeley. We were a little concerned when we funded them because they had a hot tub over their entryway. So here is their door, and here's a sort of roof on top of the door. And they actually had a hot tub up there, and when their customers would come in, it would be very common there would be naked programmers in that hot tub. So as they got big, after they got funding, they got rid of the hot tub. But it does tell you what it's like to be early, what it's really, really like to be a pioneer, what it's really, really important to not worry about the fact there's only 8 people, there's a hot tub over the entryway. What you have to worry about is, are you underneath the surface of the wave, and are you going to be part of the wave that crashes upon the incumbents, or are you going to be someone that gets crushed by the wave itself? So if I look at this in a chart in summary, where we are today, we're at a very, very seminal point. I will tell you one story I forgot back on the Bill Gates thing. Is after I met Bill, Microsoft was about to go public. Just to show you, this is 1985. And I said, Bill, you look really worried. And he said, I am worried. He goes, we've got 75 million in revenues. That's how big Microsoft was when it went public. And he goes, I can see my way to 500 million in revenues, but I can't see any further. Now, how amazing that was is there was yet not one software company in the world that had $100 million of revenue. And Bill Gates, in 1985, knew how to get to 500 million. Very similar to the Google guys sitting down and say, I have to figure out how to get to $1 billion. But if we look at this chart, where are we today? Software is big business. At the end of 2005, there were 857,000 people in the U.S. employed in U.S. VC-backed software companies. That accounted for over 3.5% of the GDP. But unlike the eras before, where it was really, really easy to find these big jumps, and you had a long period of time to watch the waves, this is not a platform shift. As Gartner, which is a big analyst in enterprise, says, it's a new model that's being implemented, a model of access, information sharing, virtualization, real time, which they call immediacy, and it's driven by the internet and next generation consumer technologies. The tipping point here was, as Greg Giannaforte talked to you about, the services architecture. The internet companies that came before used open source, they used a web services architecture, they were the first to use more dynamic programming languages like PHP, Ruby, Python, whatever. And that translated to the enterprise using that same services infrastructure. But it is only the tipping point. And if you look at this chart, you see that the step functions are going to come very rapidly as we just enter into 2007. So if we look at what's happened, there was a very, very, very important collision that happened. The new network-based model is really the collision of Moore's law, the old driver of the software industry, and Metcalfe's law, the driver of the old network industry. This is exerting a very powerful force on the software industry and will impact at least the next decade. As I said before, even the business models are changing to accommodate these dynamic market conditions. And if you don't believe me, remember some of those headlines I said before. EMC buys RSA, Cisco buys WebEx, you will see more and more there will no longer be a networking company and a software company. It will all be network-based software. How recent has this phenomenon happened? It was really only between 2004 and 2005 that households achieved bandwidth penetration, where effectively there was an expectation if you were, and I was asked not to bring my BlackBerry close to my PC for interference, my expectation, I recently came back from a trip abroad. My expectation is I can flip open that BlackBerry and I can roam on anyone's network and be securely connected to my enterprise network. Pervasive computing finally happened in the US and has clearly happened all over the world. That makes the platform viable for anything you can imagine. It also, the expectation we said before of immediacy and persistence and security. If we also layer on top of that, and I don't know if you had Tim O'Reilly in, but you'll have to have him next year. You know, Tim is an old friend of mine, and Tim's an old open source Unix guy. And when the bust happened, Tim couldn't get anybody to come to his conferences or buy his books. I mean, the music stopped for O'Reilly. And he said, I've got to communicate something more vibrant of what's going on. So this Tim O'Reilly is actually the guy that coined Web 2.0. It's an overused term, but it means the evolving user experience platform. This includes all the rich user interface technologies such as AJAX, to very broad concepts such as social networking, user-generated contents, wikis, and RSS. These are not consumer concepts. This is the same user experience that anyone who works in any job expects. And in common with all these concepts is that the user is in control. Just like my expectation of pervasiveness, immediateness, security, and that I can pick my own community here. If we look at how this has hit the enterprise, you know, Web 1.0 and Enterprise 1.0 means this movement from personal websites to shared information, from static, structured, proprietary sites and applications to dynamic and flexible, serviced environments. And it includes the powerful inclusion of actionable analytics and structured components. This is all happening right now. We're not even in the second hump here. If you look at one of the hottest little companies right now is a little company based in Australia called Atlassian. They sell enterprise wiki technology. No venture capital. They did $16 million in revenue last year. They'll probably do 50 this year. They have a little office in San Francisco now because they are servicing the Web 2.0 part of the enterprise. It shows you again how where were the collaboration vendors? Even where was WebEx here? WebEx has a platform they want to get to, but it's a little company called Atlassian that's raking in the dough. If we also go to the SaaS model that you heard from Greg Giannaforte about right now, we made our first SaaS investment in 1995. A little company called AdForce, first ad server engine. We made our second in 1996 called Employees, outsourced benefits management, just acquired last year for just under $200 million by ADP. Our most recent one was a company called Omniture, which went public about 5 months ago and has just shy of $1 billion market cap. But even here, we are only on the second generation. These are really young companies. Omniture is growing 30% a quarter. It's the fastest growing company in the world right now in revenue growth, top line, faster than Salesforce. But look at the small number of companies here that you've heard about. There are 90 other companies I could name with revenues under 10 million, but effectively, if you were graduating tomorrow, this is wide open space. So what has happened as we take Web 2.0 to Enterprise 2.0? The wave has just hit the shore. We didn't talk about virtualization. One of our more recent companies, Akimbi, virtualized the testing environment. What if you were working part-time and you decided to do unit testing for a company? Well, with Akimbe's product using VMware or Microsoft Virtual Server, you could test through a browser. It would virtualize all of the hardware and software that you were testing on. We loved this company, but we were only investors for about a year and a half because EMC bought it. Virtualization also means that the data center is shrinking. There's less hardware there because the software can provision the power supply in real time, provision the applications in real time. As an engineering major, probably virtualization, if you are not grafting towards software, is really, really an important concept for you to study the young companies. Very small set of companies so far, very hard problems. When we started investing, people were only talking about blades, and then they all got so overheated that they sort of moved away from those. But now this has moved to a broader concept. How do you virtualize it as an in-the-cloud computing platform or a real-time provision platforms? As we talked about Rome burning before, and we talked about SAP, Oracle, Microsoft, these companies got used to winning, and somebody would always be number one, and they would own the stack. Same with hardware companies. They got used to being the switch, the router vendor. That kind of market is gone. When you move away from proprietary vertical orientation to the software and hardware stack and shift this to a broad services platform without boundaries in the enterprise, there are many participants and many winners. We also just have the beginning of security as how this affects this area, and I won't spend a lot of time on that. Analytics are everywhere. Probably the most fruitful area for new companies because the data is accessible, it's on the network. The ability to provide, not just as Hyperion did, business intelligence in a cube that you performed an analysis on later, but actually in real time know the behavior, which is what Omniture does. And knowledge management, you won't hear that term in about a year. That's a dead term. We're moving to intelligent collaboration and participation. If you take business classes, you'll probably also take a class on the new software business model. How software is priced, the terms of the agreements, how you engage with the customer is changing as well. And I might also talk a few minutes about open source here. The idea behind open source software is very simple, and most people think they know all the concepts. Programmers can read, redistribute, and modify the source code for any piece of software, and the software evolves. People improve it, people adopt it, and people fix bugs. And this also has other changes on the software model. It is dramatically accelerating the pace at which conventional software is developed. Agile programming, Scrum, is something you must learn if you're going to be an active participant in an innovative software company. There's no such thing as developing a spec, going somewhere in the development organization, and a year later coming out with a finished product. Customers are part of the process itself. There has not been a software company that's come in our office in the last 2 years that does not have some piece of open source in it. So it's a set of principles and best practices for software development and deployment and pricing and support. And really at the heart of the open source movement, it's focused on maximizing and protecting the privileges of the user, not the author. And this really has driven very, very recently this dramatic shift to agile programming and closer involvement with customers. There's really a stronger focus on quality assurance. Those are more important jobs now because they don't happen linearly. What does unit tests mean in this environment? What does the engineering roadmap mean in developing something? It is all changing. And so, what we talk about when we move to the Software 2.0 platform, away from these proprietary stacks that are costly and aging, we're really talking about rapid, continuous, customer-involved development. There should be a T there. And we're really talking about revenue by agility. If you are not agile, you won't get revenue because you will get left behind. Just a couple words about how big is this, because somebody asked me about this. We have really strong growth across even the old companies and the new ones. If we average the old company growths, which is really in the slowing, with the young company growth, the 30% or 85% a year of the omnitures, the whole industry is still growing, about 8% compounded annual growth rate. And that yields a pretty big worldwide market for just enterprise software. This is just the enterprise software area. Let me just give you a couple examples of very simple companies that we funded recently to tell you how this all fits together. This is a company in Salt Lake City called Infopia. If you're Best Buy, Circuit City, you probably have excess inventory. What you used to do is some people would go to overstock.com, some people would go to eBay, and they'd write a piece of software and with eBay's permission or Overstock's permission to try to sell it on there. Last year, in the middle of the year, every single one of these companies, Yahoo, Google already, Amazon, eBay, and Salesforce, opened up their APIs. They changed from portals to platforms. Amazon is no longer a bookseller. In fact, there are a large number of new companies coming to our door where they have used the Amazon cloud, the Amazon services, as all of the pieces to build their product. In fact, last week, a company called Rackspace, it went public with $1 billion market cap. It collapsed its stock because it couldn't support the pricing that Amazon gives you for storage. So you can go to Amazon and go to the Amazon Elastic Cloud resources. They give you storage for about 50 cents for a gigabyte. They give you tools you can use for hosting, and pretty soon you can build a SaaS application with open source components using them as your outsourced hosting supplier. So what Infopia did is said, we're going to build a set of applications that allow large merchants to resell their products on any of these platforms. And we'll do all the fulfillment. It's all virtual inventory because it gets shipped from somewhere else. We'll do inventory management across these platforms. We'll be watching to see if things sell better on Amazon or eBay or Overstock. We're just using these as platforms down there. This company could not have existed a year ago. It was only 1 year ago that this shift happened where we have services platforms versus the old internet portal companies. Let's look at another example. This company was started by an engineer, Jack Gia. Jack was the CTO of Interwoven, where he worked for 9 years. He was the original founding CTO there. Interwoven is a content management company, very successful client-server company. But what Jack found is that even on the Interwoven site, when they keyed in something about, in fact, he tried this on the AMD site. If you key in as an engineer on the AMD site before Baynote was implemented in the large portal that they have for employees, heat problems with chips, the top search results would be the hot chips somebody was bringing to the company picnic. And so you'd dig through all this stuff and you'd find the link of the shared information you wanted. But so what Baynote said is, why don't we move the collaboration up to the wisdom of the employees? So effectively, they worked with behavioral guys at Stanford, and they wrote some algorithms that watch how people search their sites. Motorola has 66,000 employees, and they kept building a portal on top of the portal on top of the portal until they put Baynote in. And it watches how people find things and rearranges the order of the search results on top of your search engine. And it uses blogs, wikis, and RSS. Companies are paying a lot of money for this. Productivity changes immediately. has nothing to do with the layer below where the old client-server technology was. We funded 2 college students, 19 years old, Matt and Rishi out of Stanford, computer science graduates. They did graduate. They decided that, hey, with all this data moving around, PKI doesn't work anymore. How do you manage certificates in this environment? How do you have this heavyweight certificate architecture and actually do security? So they have 5 patents granted already and 20 in process that eliminate the certificate infrastructure through identity-based encryption, and so you can secure anything that's at rest or moving. One last recent investment is a company called Move Networks. Anybody here watch 24? No one? Did you miss it on Monday? So I did too. So go to abc.com or YouTube, or no, MySpace, the ABC sector, and go to the ABC part. You know, you usually don't like to watch things on a PC because you have to watch in that little window to get any quality, and if you hit the button for full screen, it turns into graininess. Well, what's happened with video? These guys, again, they're in Salt Lake. These are some Novell networking guys, and they said, hey, we heard Paul Sagan, who runs Akamai, say there's not enough bandwidth. What Paul meant is there's not enough quality bandwidth. And so, you know, when you try to run this on your computer, I have DSL at home, not, you know, a T3 in there. But they built an encoding technology that dynamically allocates the bandwidth of the video stream depending upon the quality of the bandwidth. So when you go watch 24 tonight, and you hit full screen, it'll be like watching HDTV because it's encoded in Move Networks technology. They also said, hey, these guys might also want some other things in their stream. They might want to stick commercials in there. They might want to actually know how long people are watching these videos. In fact, a show I didn't watch, the OC, probably more known to people, ABC took it off the air, and they have more viewers now online because the quality of the video is great. They stuck commercials in there. They know how long people are watching the show. So relative to the old Nielsen data, people are watching more television online because they can watch it anytime on any device at high quality. So if we look at life in the enterprise today in closing, I took this little picture off the Google site. Those guys look pretty happy. They get food there. You know, they're sort of the cat's meow company now. But what's happening while they're in their cubes? What's happening in the wave now? And I'm not going to tell you all the things we see in the wave because you have to figure them out for yourself because you're the innovators and we're the opportunists. But if you look at what's happening, I don't have the Q4 numbers, but in Q3 on Singular's network alone, there were 10 billion text messages. There weren't emails, there weren't searches, there were 10 billion text messages. In fact, I'm on my university board, and our CIO said, hey, well, you know, nobody's using email anymore. You know, our storage needs are going down, and they hauled in 500 students, and they said, well, you know, tell us what's going on. And one young woman had the courage to raise her hand and said, well, email is something our parents do. So the world is shifting fast. Also look at that unique visitor count in January. A little company, Wikipedia, snuck in there. It's nowhere. 189 million unique visitors in January alone. That company was not on that list last September. So the world changes really fast. You need to put out your radar of what you're watching on the invention path, you know, what is really happening, and you want to be early. Because when you're early, you get to be Hyperion, that gets purchased for $3.3 billion. You get to be Wind River, the leader in embedded systems. Or you get to be Google. You know, well, back in their dorm, they were thinking about what to do. So in ending, hang on. All of the things we talked about today, all of the movements, open source, virtualization, open standards, service-oriented architecture, SaaS, continuous rapid development, that wave has barely hit the shore. And the effects of that wave and how innovators are going to put together new companies around them is just at the beginning. And that's why I'm here talking to undergraduates, because pay attention to this wave. The incumbents will never get there. Their stuff will keep crashing on them, and there is plenty of room for innovators. So I always leave 10 key points when you pitch to a venture capitalist. Tell us what you have an unfair advantage. There only needs to be 2 of you. Understand your market. Really, really, customers are technologists. Hey, nerds run the world right now. We have CIOs and CTOs in our offices all the time. When we started our company, Winblad Venture Partners, there were only IT guys who lived in the basements of buildings. Now IT people are strategists. Find a secret sauce, somewhere where you can have an unfair competitive advantages. Build a product plan and an engineering plan, and give some thought to how you might bring the product to market. None of this needs to be complete, and no one ever brings us a complete plan. In fact, we have 4 companies coming in on Monday to our partners meeting, and if we add up all the employees in all 4 of those companies, it's less than 20 people. And it's likely 2 of those companies will leave that meeting with funding. So thanks very much. I hope that you'll all be entrepreneurs. I hope that I'll remember these faces and be able to fund some of you next year, the year after, year after, year after. So I'll now open up for questions. Thanks. Questions? I bet you have some. Oh, there must be some questions. Yes?
So you said that you have these companies come into your partners meeting and the total people is you were there at 10. So would you say it's quality, not quantity when it comes to people?
It really is 2 things. We look at the market opportunity. Is this something where you could build a big business around? And then most of the people we fund have never run companies before. They're taking a position new to them, but you're going to have to recruit the rest of your team. So we look at your ability to attract excellence. Even if you need to recruit a CEO, you're going to have to recruit it because they're not coming to work for the investors, they're coming to work with you. So that is the 2 things, the size of market and do you have the ability to attract excellence. We wouldn't have you in that partners meeting on Monday if we didn't believe you had the passion, courage, and commitment to build a real company. Yeah.
So with all the new tools available to young entrepreneurs, it's increasingly easy to create new web applications and other sorts of products like that. Do you think that's going to cause a bubble effect like what we saw with the previous .com boom?
Well, not in the enterprise sector. Potentially in the, we also say, are you a vitamin or a painkiller? Are you a product or a company? And it's fewer enterprise software companies get funded because they're just products and not companies. In the consumer internet space, whenever there's excitement, there's always a somewhat of a bubble, not a big one. I think what we've seen over the last 5 years, since 2002, is that there's been a consistent amount of capital invested each quarter and a good balance between early stage, later stage, and follow-on. So if you really add up all the total software companies that were funded last year, both consumer and enterprise, it's about 600 new companies in the US. That's not enough to create a bubble. And companies work hard to get money. Also, if you run out of money in your A round, there are some companies that Darwin affects very early on. But you're very right. The bar is getting higher, though, because the ability to tools, you don't have to go buy anything. The open source tools are very, very robust. I was just reading an email from Martin at MySQL, and he was talking about their users conference next week and how he felt that the open source movement had just started and was just picking up steam. So it means that you have to commit to building something, really nail your product plan, really be talking to your marketplace and testing things out early, whether it's consumer or enterprise, That's what really has changed, not so much overfunding. We all learned a lesson of investing too fast is a very bad thing. Very bad, and we all learned it. That includes me. I saw another hand raised over here. Another question. Yes? You know, not really. If we look at the software there's not one company in the world today that I know that doesn't consider software part of their palette for innovation. It is a tool for competitive advantage. That has reshaped the size of the pool of software companies from a little pond in '89 to an ocean. You know, everywhere we look, there's a new software opportunity. And also, when we look at some of the cost advantages software can get, it's really huge. Which is why we have these CIOs coming in. I'll ask 5 companies. I'll give you an example. Move. That's a video infrastructure company. MuleSource, open source company, really great open source stuff for enterprise service bus and integration platform. What are some of the other last 5? SyncVoice. They actually, as people have moved from PBXs, which again were hardware, to IP telephony, there are a lot of quality issues of the quality of voice. So they do to voice what Move does to video. So you can see I can roam around and it looks like a very eclectic set of companies. And that's because we have many choices. Is that combo of market and team, it ends up in this market. But there are lots of choices that can be made in software right now. And this is going to last for a long time. That's what's challenging to the big companies, is there's not one big thing they can do to win. 3 weeks ago, all Microsoft talked about was how do we get better in search, because Google's our big competitor. Their most important product launch over the last few years was a product called SharePoint. Who's SharePoint's competitor? WebEx. SharePoint has 85 million users. So Microsoft wakes up one day and all of a sudden their biggest competitor is not Google, it's Cisco. So you can't win with a sledgehammer anymore. You have to be very adept at a broad set of solutions. And that means that there'll be an opportunity to create a lot of big companies here who will start in these areas like video, like voice, like integration, and carve out big spaces from a really important hole in the market that a Microsoft and SAP and Oracle might have missed as they fight bigger battles. Oops, let's get. Yes. Are there good examples of all of these 10 key points? I'll go back to the original Hyperion pitch. And what we like to say is, in 15 minutes, we know, unless something in our due diligence tells us ready, this is a fundable company. 2 guys, Jim and Bob. Jim was a sales guy. Bob at a decision support company called ComShare. Bob was a engineer at NASA Ames. Never even written commercial code before. They came in and Jim opened the discussion by saying, I've been trying to sell new products to my customers at ComShare, thousands of customers. I don't have anything new to sell them. So I, as a sales guy, I was the top sales guy, and my earnings are slowing. And I tried to figure out what else could I bring them. And they said, well, we want to do analysis where it is, we can pivot the data effectively in a cube. And we can't make that work because there was one technical problem. You could either build a cube for sparse data or you could build a cube for dense data. And nobody had figured out the algorithm that allowed you to pour any kind of data in a cube and also build a user interface, in this case Excel. They said, so we searched all over the place and we found a guy who had worked on this problem at Imperial College in the UK. And we went and talked to 100 customers and said, if we build it, would you buy it? Unsolved problem, large market, validated by customers, 2 guys. They were really passionate about this. Jim wanted to bring more value to the customers. It's okay that he wanted to earn more money too. We knew we were going to fund this. We then put Jim and Bob in a car, drove them around Silicon Valley, John and I, and made them give the pitch to potential buyers of the technology if they'd build it. And the buyers responded just like we did. So they were able to communicate large market, unmet need, technical hurdle that only we can solve. We can apply for a patent for it. We can build this very quickly. We've mocked up the user interface. We've hacked into Excel to pour it all into Excel so we can have pivot tables there, which now you take for granted. We think we can charge this much money for it, but we don't know. They didn't have a sales model and marketing outline. They didn't have their P&L, but we were sure, just like them, the market was large enough that when we put the numbers together, it would ramp out. That company, 2 people, $2.5 million, 4 years later, it went public. It was the largest IPO. The same year Netscape went public, it was a larger IPO than Netscape. That is a classic example. The Move guys. Move guys, you know, we're seeing YouTube and we're saying, oh gosh, you know, everybody's funding a video sharing site, you know, how are these things going to make money? And YouTube never had to prove whether it could make money. It got acquired before then. And we thought, oh God, there's video everywhere. And we started looking at a lot of CDN, content distribution network companies. We looked at all sorts of peer-to-peer schemes came in, and we thought, oh, those aren't going to work, you know, as infrastructure. These guys walked in the door and said, hey, it's all about the quality of the bandwidth. And what is there today? Flash. 2 weeks ago, Disney converted all of their content from Flash to Move. They showed us the demo. We didn't want them to leave the room. Unfortunately, they showed 4 other VCs the demo, so it was a fight to get that deal, and we happened to know the entrepreneurs better than the other VCs. But we knew, because we, again, the wave. Videos here, videos here. Somebody's going to figure out how to make the quality better, how to make better tools. All we have is Flash. Oh, here's somebody saying peer-to-peer, maybe that solution. Somebody's saying maybe we'll just have some interleaving technology. No, that doesn't work either. And these guys, they came to us with that product completely done. They had worked on this for 2 years. This is long before anybody was talking about the YouTube craze. And they said, here is the issue. Here is a breakthrough technology. Here is our go-to-market strategy. And by the way, we think we have to leave early now because we're about ready to sign a contract with a big customer. We knew in 15 minutes because we've been watching the wave. Same as, you know, with Hyperion. It's, you know, what's going to be new in analytics. So that's how we knew. But don't try to get all 10 points right. Just team and market. And even if you visit a venture capitalist early, we'll help you, you know, figure out the other things and either send you back to the drawing board to figure out a few things, tell you what we've already seen without naming names so that you know you might be too far ahead of the curve or behind the curve. Any more questions? You had another one over here.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, I think it's likely that companies building software end up selling for a particular product to a bigger company they acquire. Do you think it's still viable for companies to go public?
That's a very good question. Are most companies going to get acquired, or is it viable for them to go public? All good companies get acquisition offers along the way. So what we try to do is build a company that is good enough that they can decide which path to take. It's a big commitment to be a public company. In the case of Omniture, that team wanted to be a public company. That was their goal line. And they are public and doing quite well. In the case of employees, you know, they were probably a year away from becoming a public company. And ADP made them an acquisition offer. And the acquirer comes in and says, why would you want to be a public company? There's all this Sarbanes-Oxley stuff, and you have to wedge your revenue into quarters, and you won't be as agile as you are now. Take the money now. The acquirer seduced the company into that. Everybody made money, including the investors, but they could have been a public company if they'd wanted to go one more year. But they weighed that out, and if management doesn't want to go public, we can't make them go public. Most companies are acquired, then go public. Good companies can go public anytime. And good companies get acquisition offers all the time. Bad companies are stuck. Any more questions?
Since we're running out of time, let me ask actually the last one.
All right. Of the year?
Of the year. There's and I'm going to set it up with a few data points. A couple that you brought up and one that Jeffrey Moore brought up. And this all has to do with the software industry structure looking forward. Jeffrey Moore, a while ago, came and spoke, and he said, the problem with enterprise software these days is that for the past 10 years, we've been fixing problems in enterprises, and now their problem is that they've got all these old solutions sitting around, and they're not really ready to hear about new solutions because they're probably doing it. That's one data point.
Yes.
So I'm going to still list these and let you analyze it. Okay. Then another thing that you brought up today was that hardware companies seem to be becoming software companies. So on one hand, people at enterprise software are saying, oh, enterprise software is really hard to be in. Then we have hardware companies like Cisco who are recognizing, and frankly Intel, their margins have been decreasing every year for like 5 years or something through their financials. And they all look very envious at the 80%, 60% margins that software companies are still having. And so, for whatever reason, that their hardware companies are doing the opposite of what we were always told they were supposed to do. They were supposed to become more and more horizontal, take thinner and thinner pieces of that whole market. And now you're saying that they're going the opposite direction. They're going back to solutions and big, they're becoming vertical in a way. They're taking the software back in, right? So that's opposite of what you were saying. And then the third data point, you're saying that the new software companies are doing these things very disruptively, even to Oracle and Microsoft, and that these guys can't compete. So it almost sounds like the new little guys, however many of them there are either going to actually wipe out the old guys, but they can't really be absorbed into the old software companies. So like we hear all these things. So what does that in the end mean? Is software really going to happen? Is it the hardware companies or is it the behavioral companies that are going to just take over?
Well, first of all, software economics are really attractive, and good software companies have 80% gross margins or better, and 20% EBITDA or better. And that has never been achieved by hardware companies, no matter what, because the variable cost of the second unit in software is 0. And the variable cost of hosted software is kind of low as well. One of the things that's happened in this, as I mentioned here, in this services architecture is that we've moved beyond a rip and replace market. So if you look at the competition between Oracle and SAP, for example, is anybody going to rip out SAP? Probably not. But if you're rolling up two big companies, you may decide, am I going to buy more SAP or more Oracle, and who wins that battle? That's an ugly battle. That's an end game battle. What's happened when you move from these vertical stacks? Here's the operating system, here's some middleware, and here's the applications, and here's middleware. And you start saying that I'm going to put a services layer. MuleSource. MuleSource doesn't have to rip out anything. When you put in their contemporary integration platform, very lightweight, very Java-based, you're not writing APIs anymore and connecting the knee bone to the ear. You really have a services bus. It's really an enterprise services bus. You really change how this works. Also, if you do have something that is in the SaaS, it is sitting outside the firewall, it's on the network, you're not installing anything. There's nothing you install for Salesforce. Salesforce is also built, there's actually a MuleSource integration platform to Salesforce. So we've changed the model so it's not the what are you going to pull out to get this in. We've also moved up the stack. If you look at what's going on in the collaboration area, that little company Atlassian I mentioned, they don't touch any of the SAP stuff. You know, they're way at where all the action is happening in the completely unstructured data. So what's really, really changed here is if you go back to this particular chart right here, this is the important chart, that you really go from, you know, having an operating system be important and picking one, an application and picking one, maybe a middleware stack like a Tibco or a Web Methods, for example, and picking one, to not doing that anymore. It is really, truly componentized software. And when I co-wrote this book, Object-Oriented Software, there was an argument about whether people would use C++. I mean, now even, what's the argument between dynamic and static languages? You know, that's also changed. You know, these are really whole new Python, Ruby, you know, Perl as an example of one of them, but really moving to a services architecture. That pivot point is very, very seminal. It also allows you to integrate outside the enterprise, which none of these things do. So that stuff lays around until it dies. What Gardner is saying is that in 2010, by about that time, that stuff is going to start looking really old. So people are going to start shutting it down and replacing it, because they will, in the enterprise, have the agility of building better applications. In the case of MuleSource, one of the largest banks in the world built their trading platform on the MuleSource Enterprise Services Bus all by themselves. There wasn't even a company funded yet. It was just in the open source universe. This is speaking spades to these companies. Why would Oracle be interested in taking over customer service for Red Hat? Just to be mean? Probably. But also because, you know, they know that that ecosystem is real. Customers are smarter. We really are moving to this concept of componentized software. It's so cool. I mean, when you think about how this stuff is all coming together, it's the holy grail we've always looked for, where it is really much flatter. And, you know, people have stayed away from enterprise software in the past because of exactly what I said and you just said, that it's a win-lose battle. It's like, if I don't end up number one, I am dead, and I'm going to have to fight for my piece in the stack. Well, what if you're a widget box? You have thousands of enterprise widgets, and you're all over the stack. You may end up, you know, being a widget on a blog application. You may end up being a widget within, you know, an Amazon offering. You know, you fit in all over the stack, and that's really a dramatic change. If you remember, it was 2005 when the famous Ray Ozzie memo was leaked to the Wall Street Journal, saying this services software approach is going to be disruptive. 2005, we were preparing Omniture to go public. We've been investing in the SaaS and SOA area already for 10 years. And that's when that memo was leaked in the Wall Street Journal. So, you know, the comment about the enterprise market being hard, all markets are hard. The comment about it being somewhere you don't want to be is completely wrong. And the more venture capitalists that think that, the better, the happier I am. Because then I get to find the Move networks and the MuleSources and the Sync Voices and the Scalents and the Akimbis and the Derivas. And we haven't even talked about what's happening in the data center, you know, which used to be machines and machines. And we have a company called Scalent. They virtualize how you access the power supply. all the way down to what applications are assembling themselves at what points in time to be used on what servers. It's all virtualized. We funded that company about 4 years ago, and they have just started really taking off. And that's all about one of the boringest parts of the enterprise, the data center. So it really is, people say to me, why are you still interested in investing in software? You've done it for 18 years, why don't you pick energy or, just work on global warming or something, other than the fact I know nothing about those sectors. It really is the most vibrant and disruptive time in software, and real software, not just interesting consumables, but real software that there ever has been. Thanks.